Hi, it's Ray Grant. It is Friday, September 27th, 2024. It is 12:58 p.m. here in Pittsburgh. I'm covering the topics of Mike Butterfield's Crackpot files in the order that he covers them in his article, and it is fitting today that I happen to be covering the subject of the Lake Berryessa attack because it's the 55th anniversary of that attack. Although the attack occurred at 6:30 p.m., so it's not. Plus, you have the time zone difference, so it isn't exactly 55 years, but almost. Just want to say that just in case Butterfield jumps in and and says, "Well, it's not exactly 55 years." He's very precise about what other people are saying. Anyway, Ray Grant claims that the Zodiac was trying to relate biographical information by using the number 17. Grant repeats a false claim first introduced by Gareth Penn, that victims Bryan Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were stabbed a total of 17 times. Hartnell himself stated that he was stabbed 6 times. Therefore, the entire theory about the number of stab wounds is pure garbage. Throughout his book, Grant proves that he has relied on Penn's incorrect and poorly researched accounting of the facts in this case. Okay, well, let's put that to the test, shall we? Butterfield says, Hartnell himself stated that he was stabbed 6 times. Okay, well, let's go to Bryan Hartnell. Let's go to, this is the Zodiac speaking documentary. And
what was happening. She saw what was happening then, and I'm sure
we have Bryan Hartnell here.
It was really cold in the evenings, which really wasn't so much cold. It was just the inconvenience of being stuck out all night. And I said, get down.
So this is Bryan Hartnell basically talking.
He tied us up
in
our feet
2007,
so
which is when they
were
about 2007, which is when
the
Fincher movie came out, and the
do.
documentary was made around the same time.
And I kind of looked around.
So this is Bryan Hartnell giving his own narrative of the attack, and
didn't want to ever be convicted of shooting somebody, so that on many occasions they would leave the gun unloaded. So if something
and you can find this online just by going on YouTube, just by going typing in "This is the Zodiac speaking" documentary.
Loaded guns, but that's what I had read, and I asked him. I said, "Is the gun really loaded?" He pulls the gun and pulls out the clip and shows me a full clip. Puts it back, sticks it in his holster.
Keep in mind, this is Bryan Hartnell talking about an attack which occurred 38 years before.
He put the gun away. He's going to leave now. Obviously, we couldn't do anything. We're tied up, and I'm obviously not going to be making any moves. And I'm just kind of trying to collect my thoughts. What are we going to do? How am I going to get out of this? Figuring out what options we had.
Let's see exactly what Bryan Hartnell says about how many times he was stabbed.
He pulls the knife, and the next thing I know is I feel it in my back. He stabbed me, I think, 6 times, and they were in fairly quick succession. The difference, of course...
What Bryan Hartnell actually says there is, he stabbed me, I think, 6 times. He doesn't say he stabbed me 6 times. He says he stabbed me, I think, 6 times, which means Bryan Hartnell is not absolutely certain about how many times he was stabbed, okay? And there wouldn't have been any particular way of checking how many times he was stabbed, since he was stabbed. All of his stab wounds were in his back. When's the last time you took a good close look at your own back, okay? Unless you have one of those mirror setups like they have in clothing stores where you can see yourself, from behind, you would not be able to do it. Plus, you have to remember that in the immediate aftermath of the attack, Bryan Hartnell was very groggy And that fact is mentioned numerous times during when he was giving interviews back in the days after the attack. It was that he was under fairly heavy sedation. So his awareness of how many times he was stabbed in the back has to have a question mark after it, right? The one piece of evidence that we do have about how many times he was stabbed comes from the Napa Register, which was the newspaper in Napa, and there was an article about the attack on Monday, September 29th, 1969. That's the same day that Cecilia Shepard died, unfortunately. And in the article, the Napa Register says that Bryan Hartnell was stabbed about 10 times and Cecilia Shepard was stabbed about 7 times. Now, granted, the newspaper got the two mixed up. We know that Cecilia Shepard was stabbed 10 times because that's what her autopsy said. So I assume there was just a kind of like switch in the two numbers, and Bryan Hartnell was the one who was stabbed about, and it does say about in the paper. It says about 10 times and about 7 times. However, those are the two numbers that the newspaper gave. And the question is, where did the newspaper get those numbers from? And that's easy to figure out. The beat reporter for the newspaper would have been given those numbers either by some hospital spokesman or a doctor who is treating the victims, okay? So it is a relatively definite count of 10 and 7, not 10 and 6, okay? So this notion that Mike Butterfield is somehow correcting this very shoddy reporting on the part of myself or on the part of Gareth Penn is a little silly, isn't it? I mean, yes, the victim himself, who was, not in the best shape and couldn't see his own back, thinks that he was stabbed 6 times. That's what he said 38 years later. Okay. But when the newspaper in its next edition reported on the number of stab wounds, they gave 10 and 7 for a total of 17. Okay. So I tend to go with what the hospital apparently told the newspaper rather than what Bryan Hartnell's not exactly precise and somewhat incoherent memory was. It's obviously it's only a difference of one stab, but it does make a difference when you're talking about what the Zodiac killer was doing. Was he actually obsessed with the number 17? The answer to that is it would seem to be so, because, for example, when he was at Lake Berryessa, he had all the time in the world. He could have stabbed Bryan 100 times. He could have stabbed Cecilia Shepard 100 times. He could have stabbed them until his arms fell off. If you watch the scene in the David Fincher movie, you will note that the stabbing episode takes less than a minute, takes, I'm guessing, barely even 45 seconds. It happens very, very quickly. And that's exactly what Bryan Hartnell said. It was just boom, 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 boom. And the same thing, although it took a little bit longer with Cecilia, because Bryan essentially played dead, just stayed on the ground, whereas Cecilia kind of like twisted under the knife thrusts. Okay, so it did take a little bit longer with her. However, as I said, had the killer wanted to, he could have stabbed them for, many more times than he did. Okay, so that it is noteworthy that they were only stabbed 17 times, and neither of them was, none of the wounds was mortal at the time that the stabbing occurred. In fact, the couple was not aware that that either of them were near death or anything. They had time to untie themselves afterwards. It wasn't until they tried to stand up and felt faint that they thought they might actually be in trouble. Bryan was able to, I believe, crawl up to the highway and try to flag down a motorist, and eventually, about an hour later, a guy on a boat saw them and contacted the authorities. And basically, the reason Cecilia Shepard died is that she just lost too much blood. If help had gotten to them sooner, she probably would have survived. Okay, so it is noteworthy that the two were only stabbed 17 times. And what we see in the case of the Zodiac is we have Z408, the first cipher, which was (24 times 17), 24 rows of 17 columns. Okay. Then we have a Z340, which was 20 rows times 17 columns. Okay. And we have Z13, which was just 13 characters. But then we have Z32, which was, it could very easily have been 2 rows of 16 columns, but it wasn't. It is 1 row of 17 columns and then a row of 15 characters, okay? And that adds up to 32, obviously, okay? So it does seem clear that the killer was somewhat obsessed with the idea of the number 17. If we're talking about the what the basis for what Gareth talks about time, well, I think I'll just use this thing here. What Gareth talks about, how why he calls his book Time 17. It's that those letters basically convert to a particular number, okay? And again, you can see that you can read this in Gareth Penn's book. It's online. All you have to do is Google read Gareth Penn's Time 17. It will take you to Dave Aranchek's site, and you can actually navigate around, and you can read the entire book that way if you want. I have 3 copies of that book, by the way. I was very likely the first person to read Time 17 back in 1987. I don't think I was the first person to get a copy, but I think I was probably the first person to read it all the way through. Anyway. If you look at this is digital Morse. It's 1 for dash and 0 for dot. Okay, so it's T, which is 1, I, which is 0, 0, M, which is 1, 1, E, which is 0, and S, which is 0, 0, 0. This is the number 17. Okay, so what you get, let me see if I can do this here. This is 8192. This would be 4096. This would be 2048. This is the 1024 and 512. And then 16 and 1. So this is just working out the binary numbers. 8192, 1024 here for the first one, 512 for the second one, 16 here, 1 here. Let's use our calculator to figure this out. It is 8192. Oops. 8192. I don't know if you can see that. Plus 1024. 9216. Plus 512. 9728. Plus 16. 9744. Plus 1, 9745, okay? So, times 17 converts to the number 9745. That's what this phrase converts to this number through Morse binary using digital Morse. Okay, 9745 would have been the 38th birthday of Berta Margulies. She was born September 7th, 1907. So September 7th, 1945, she was 38 years old. For some reason, that's considered within the Zodiac project to be a very significant date. I'm not sure exactly why. I think the number 38. Let's see if we can do this here. TIME. It's 20, 29, 42, 40. Well, it's 47 by alphabet quantities, but it should be 38, I think. TIME equals 38, so it would be 32, 16, 8, 32 plus 4 is 36, plus 2 is 38. So maybe September 7th, 1945, her 38th birthday was somehow a significant time in her life. I'm not sure. I was asked yesterday, and Ned DeHaan happened to mention, who would you most like to talk to? If I were going to have a conversation with Michael O'Hare, I think one of the questions I would ask him is, like, what is the real significance of 9745? And other than the obvious, I mean, why is the invoking of Berta Margulies' 38th birthday significant? I'm not sure, except that 38 converts to time. I think there's some angular significance to it, which I talk about probably. I think I talked about it in my 1990 book. I don't know how convincing it was. Anyway, what we're going to look at now is January 22nd, 1943. That's Michael O'Hare's date of birth, okay? The Lake Berryessa attack occurred. Whoops. I think I can. Well, that's not gonna. Try this again. The Lake Berryessa attack happened September 27th, 1969. Okay. So, on September 27th, 1969, a couple was attacked by a man who put on this, what you might call a ceremonial hood. Okay. And then performed a stabbing where he stabbed the two victims 17 times. Okay. And he was invoking the phrase times 17, which converts to 9745. Okay. Now the question becomes, why did he do that? Well, Michael O'Hare was born on January 22nd, 1943. And I don't know if I need to. Well, we can do this by just adding leap years. Let's do. O'Hare would have been 26 years old at the time. So if you start with, you're starting at 0 and you're doing 26 times, what's 26 times 365 equals 9490. Okay. So 26 years is 9490. That's not counting the leap years. Okay. So if he was born in 1943, we have 1944, 48, 52, 56, 60, 64, 68. So we have to add 7 days. So the leap years get us up to 9497. That's how old he is on January 21st, 1943. Okay. So if you add another 10 days for January, now you have 9507. February is February 69 would have been 28 days. So it's 9535. March would have been 31 days, so it's 9566. April is 30 days, 9596. May is 31 days, so it's 9627. June is 30 days, 9657. July is 31 days, 9688. August is 31, so that's 97. 31 is 9719. And 27 plus 9719 is 9746. Okay, so Michael O'Hare, if you don't count the original day, if you don't count January 22nd, on September 27th, 1969, was 9,745 days old. Okay, in other words, on my birthday is April 29th, 1951. My birthday is actually the first day of the next year of life, because I was born Sunday, April 29th, 1951. At the end of April 28th, 1952, I was 365 days old. And then, so I was 1 year old. April 29th, 1952, I was a year and a day old. That was my 366th day of life. So anyway, Michael O'Hare on September 27th, 1969 is 9,745 days old. That's accurate. So he is on September 27th, 1969, Michael O'Hare is times 17. So he puts on a ceremonial hood and he acts out this thing where he accosts a couple in the park, has them tied up the way, similar manner, I guess, to Domingos Edwards, uses a hollow clothesline cord, then does not shoot them. He pulls a double-bladed knife out, and in a ceremonial action, raising his hand above his head. Well, to some extent, he did that. My guess is, once Cecilia Shepard started moving around, he found that he couldn't keep doing the ceremonial thing. But the point to be made was that he was essentially celebrating the fact that he was times 17 by stabbing the two victims 17 times. Okay, and we see the times 17. We see that theme also in the ciphers. We see it in Z408. We see it in Z340. We see it in we even see it in Z32, okay? So that number 17 is very, very significant to him. It's very significant to the Zodiac project. I'll give you an example. I mentioned the fact that I have like an entire video about how one of the themes of the Zodiac project was 2 times 23. For example, Michael O'Hare was 23 years old when he murdered Sherry Bates. He intended to die in 1989 in the Terminus event when he was 46. So the entire Zodiac project would comprise this idea of 2 times 23. Okay, and we see it, for example, the idea of the planetary poles. You know, you talk about magnetic north. Well, the poles of the Earth are 23 degrees away from being directly vertical. Okay, and they're the magnetic poles are 23 degrees off from the whatever it was, compass, the north, whatever north is. Anyway, north and south. So the Zodiac project also had 2 poles because Berta Margulies was born in Poland in 1907. And so she was one pole, and her son, Michael O'Hare, because he was her son and he was, he was a descendant of a Pole, so he was also Polish. So the Zodiac project also, like the Earth, contained 2 poles. So this idea of 2 times 23 was very significant. And if you look, for example, at this equation, two times 23 times 17, what do you get? What you get is and you can do this on your calculators at home, you get 782. What is the significance of 782? Well, 782 is the number of days between October 30th, 1966, when Sherry Bates was attacked, and December 20th, 1968, when David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were attacked. Okay? It's 782 days. Okay? So, now, look, I realize that people are going to come back and they're going to say, well, you can prove anything by numbers. Yeah, but most of the numbers that I cite are straightforward. They aren't, I don't do a lot of like adding and subtracting and turning things upside down. So the intent behind behind stabbing the victims 17 times, times 17, was to create that theme in the Zodiac Project, okay? Again, it's why he wore a ceremonial hood. And when he goes up to the car at the end of again, he just stabbed them 17 times. It would have taken, 40 seconds, 45 seconds? He then walks up to Bryan Hartnell's car. By the way, how did he know which car was Bryan Hartnell's? The car was parked like 500 yards from where they were. It could have been somebody else's, but somehow he knew that car was Bryan's. When he writes on the car door, and he cites the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs murder, and then he cites the Lake Berryessa attack. Okay, and at the bottom, where his signature would be, he writes "by knife." Why? He writes "by knife" because he is identifying himself by knife. Where the signature would be, he says, "I am signing myself by knife." Okay? If you convert the phrase times 17 to a number of days that someone has been alive, that would identify. Now, obviously, it would also identify a bunch of other people, who were born on the same day he was, but that's going to be a fairly small percentage of the population. And Michael O'Hare just happens to be a suspect in the Zodiac case. And it's quite a coincidence that the phrase times 17, with which Gareth Penn goes to the trouble of using as the title of his book, that just happens to convert to 9745, which in a sense was the age of Michael O'Hare, when we use date of birth as an identifier. When I do like I have to do like medical medical administrating for one of my siblings, and who gets a prescription from a specialty pharmacy, and each time I talk to them, I have to recite his birth date. Okay. Because we are and if I go down to my local pharmacy and I'm getting a prescription or what have you, the first thing they ask me is, what's your date of birth? Okay. So in effect, Michael O'Hare was providing his date of birth. Okay. By what he did at Lake Berryessa. He's saying, I am times 17. I am 9745. If you can find a suspect who is 9,745 days old on that day, you will probably have the Zodiac killer. Okay? He was identifying himself by knife. Okay? And the couple was stabbed 17 times. Okay? I'm going to I'm going to deal with this issue of where people are going to object to this video and a lot of the other things I say for that matter, because they're saying most of the time I'm not talking about numbers. Most of the time I'm just talking about the evidence in the case. I'm talking about the same sort of thing that you would hear on a true crime podcast or a broadcast, okay? But the notion that we have to throw out any sort of conversion from, letters to numbers or what have you, we're talking about a case where the serial killer was sending ciphers to the newspapers. And when Dave Aranchek published his episode 5 of the, Zodiac Cracked, and, most people, myself included, accepted his solution to Z340. Now, I accept the cryptographic solution. It isn't what the point of Z340 is. The point of Z340 is that the grid of the cipher was 20 rows by 17 columns. Why? Because the Zodiac killer fired 10 shots at Lake Herman Road. That's the first thing he says in the cover letters. 10 shots were fired. He fired 9 shots at Blue Rock Springs Park, and he fired 1 shot at Presidio Heights. That adds up to 20 by gun. Okay? What did he do at Lake Berryessa, as I've just demonstrated? It was 10 stab wounds to Cecilia Shepard. And 7 to Bryan Hartnell. Which adds to 17 by knife. And if you look at the Halloween card, what does it say? By gun is vertical. Okay, the vertical component of Z340 is 20 rows. It's 20 times he struck by gun. So it's 10, 9 plus 1 equals 20, okay? The horizontal component of the Lake Berryessa car door message is by knife. Why? Because the horizontal component of Z340 is 17 columns. So he struck 17 times by knife, okay? And if you, of course, if you add those two together, what you get is 20 by gun, 17 by knife, which is 37, which is why he says in the Exorcist letter, down at the bottom of the Exorcist letter, me 37 SFPD 0. He's saying I struck 37 times and the police haven't laid a glove on me. Okay. Now, what disguises this is the fact that they realized that as long as they kept showing increasing numbers for their victim, what looked like a victim count, so they started, I believe, with, well, the first actual scorecard was in the Mount Diablo letter, where it said, basically, it said Zodiac symbol 12, currently claiming 12 victims. And then that went up to 13. And then in the LA Times letter, it appeared to go up to 17. And then from that point until 3 years later would have been the beginning of 1971, and then the exorcist letter was sent in 1974. So it looks like he's been killing a bunch of people, and he's claiming 37 victims. But that isn't what he's saying. What he's saying is, I struck 37 times, and the police haven't laid a glove on me. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why 17 is very significant. And again, what you have with Mike Butterfield is you have someone who is stepping all over this stuff because he's just not a very good researcher. And I believe in taking witnesses and victims at their word unless I have better information. And as I said, I think what the Napa Register says is more credible, to use a Mike Butterfield word. It's more credible than what, in this case, than what Bryan Hartnell said. Okay, so that pretty much deals with. Let me see here. Do I have any other examples? Well, I have what I consider to be a very interesting idea. And this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but why not? Here is a possibly significant address. Okay, I'm going to show you, which none of you have ever seen this address before, I guarantee you. So this is like a news flash here. It's I think this is interesting. You may disagree with me. Let me put this down here. Okay. This is a place that no longer, well, the building is still there, but the place itself no longer exists. It's called the French Hospital. It was at 329 West 29th Street. By the way, because it took up an entire block, it was also 330 West 30th Street, but 329 West 29th Street, I think, is more in keeping with the Zodiac case. New York, 10001. Okay. What is this place? It's a maternity hospital. This was a significant enough maternity hospital in Manhattan back in the 1940s and 1950s, and maybe in the 30s. I think in the 60s as well, possibly into the 70s. There used to be a message board online about the French hospital. I may have covered this already, by the way. So, but it bears for me it bears repeating. The French hospital was a maternity hospital. Literally, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of New Yorkers were born there. Okay, and among other people, Ray Grant was born there. In fact, the first there were 7 kids in my family. And I have, let me see here. I have an older brother who was born in 1941. I have an older sister who was born in 1942. I have an older brother who was born in 1947. I was born in 1951, and I have another. One of my younger brothers was born in 1954. Now I have a younger sister and a younger brother who were born in Pittsburgh because we moved. My family moved to Pittsburgh in 1955. But oops. Oh. Okay, I think my oops. Okay, my marker just left. So, all right. Anyway, I have a brother who was born in 41, a sister was born in 42, a brother was born in 47. I was born in 51. I have another brother who was born in 54. And all five of those siblings were born in the French hospital. So it was a very busy place. And as we know, Michael O'Hare was born in New York City. It is entirely possible that he was born in the French hospital on January 22nd, 1943. It's a possibility. I was born there. If Michael O'Hare was born there, then you would have this amazing coincidence that the trigger man for the Zodiac project and the person who solved the case were both born in the same building, okay? I guess we'll find out maybe we'll find out at some point. But the reason I mentioned this particular address is that the zip code is 10001, okay? So I'll just use the, oh no, this is the black. That was the blue that fell, okay. 10001, this is 16, this is 1. So in binary math, you have 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. So it's 16. 10001 is 16 plus 1 is 17. In other words, the zip code for this address is binary 17. Okay? Now, I don't know that was necessarily the reason that Michael O'Hare was obsessed with the number 17, but in that sense, 17 again would be an identifier of where he was born. Okay, so I'm just this is almost a kind of introduction to how the people who were planning the Zodiac project, how they thought, basically. Okay, so anyway, the point of all of this is to point out that first of all, I believe it is more likely, it is most likely that Bryan Hartnell was actually stabbed 7 times. That's what the beat reporter for the Napa Register was told by the hospital or by the doctors. Okay, and we see the number 17 cropping up in the cipher numbers. 17 appears to perhaps be a significant number for the Zodiac killer, and there are other examples of this that I could cite. I'm sure if I were given enough time. But this is just to make the point that that there's a reason that the killer puts on this ceremonial hood, goes to a tremendous amount of trouble to fashion this hood where everything was sewn and the Zodiac insignia was sewn, and he goes and he puts the hood on. I mean, he could have worn a Texarkana Phantom hood, which would have been much more comfortable. Would have just covered his face. This thing pretty much, it was like a hangman's hood, and pretty much covered like his head and shoulders, and it was extremely elaborate. Okay, so clearly he was trying to make a very elaborate point, and it was a departure from what he had done, obviously, not just in Vallejo, but also in Riverside. If you assume that he is the killer in Riverside, as I do, okay. So again, the question is, why did this event that happened 55 years ago today? Why was it such a departure for the Zodiac killer? And the reason is, it's for all intents and purposes, it is his ceremonial identification. He's telling you who he is, okay? And that's why the number of stab wounds is significant. And as I said, I don't. Well, I believe that Bryan Hartnell was stabbed 17 times, not just because that's what the Napa Register says, but also because it's what Gareth Penn says, and I believe Gareth Penn is one of the conspirators in the Zodiac project. Okay, so we have we have evidence both from the newspaper and from Gareth Penn himself that that this number was significant. So, and by the way, I just want to make the point that that the stuff about how old Michael O'Hare was in days, that is from Gareth's book. So I mean, that isn't something that I thought up. So anyway, um, that's I think pretty much what that's pretty much what I wanted to say about Lake Berryessa. I believe that that that's what it was. It was kind of it was in some ways it's the Zodiac killer's signature event, and it's a signature event because in effect he is identifying himself by knife. And for that reason, it is important to realize that he stabbed Bryan 7 times, and the total number of stab wounds inflicted, which was a small number when you consider what the circumstances were. But the total number of stab wounds was 7. Okay, so anyway, I will continue with the Crackpot files again. This is to make the point that that the evidence basically says again that Mike Butterfield is wrong about the number of stab wounds. So okay, I will talk to you again soon.